The National Rugby League is the top league of professional rugby league clubs in Australasia, run by the Australian Rugby League Commission. The NRL's main competition is known as the Telstra Premiership due to sponsorship from Telstra Corporation and is contested by 16 teams, 15 of which are based in Australia with one based in New Zealand. It is regarded as the world's elite rugby league championship and, per season, is the most viewed and attended rugby league club competition in the world. The National Rugby League is Australia's top-level domestic rugby league club competition. It contains clubs from the original Sydney Club Rugby League competition, which had been running continuously since 1908. The NRL formed in the aftermath of the 1990s Super League War as a joint partnership between the Australian governing body, the Australian Rugby League and media giant News Corporation controlled Super League, after both organisations ran premierships parallel to each other in 1997. This partnership was dissolved in February 2012, with control of the NRL going to the independently formed Australian Rugby League Commission. NRL matches are played in Australia and New Zealand from March to October. The season culminates in the Premiership deciding game, the NRL Grand Final, traditionally one of Australia's most popular sporting events and one of the world's largest attended sporting championship games. In addition, the NRL Premiers also play in the World Club Challenge, a pre-season match against the champions of the European Super League competition, the reigning premiers of the North Queensland Cowboys. History, origin and establishment. The New South Wales Rugby League ran the major rugby league competition of New South Wales from its inception in 1908 until 1994. Following the introduction of a new format for interstate rugby league, the State of Origin series in 1980, the decade of the 1980s brought about expansion of the NSWRL Premiership, with the introduction of commercial sponsorship, the Winfield Cup, and the addition of non-Sydney-based teams, Canberra and Illawarra in 1982. Although this move brought more interest in the competition statewide in New South Wales, it would spell the beginning of the demise of some of the traditional Sydney-based clubs as well as the Brisbane Rugby League Premiership. Following the 1983 season, Foundation club Newtown Jets were ultimately forced to withdraw from the competition because of financial difficulties. Further expansion of the league followed in 1988, with another 3 teams based outside Sydney introduced to the competition, the Newcastle Knights and the first 2 Queensland teams, the Brisbane Broncos and Gold Coast Tweed Giants. The Brisbane and Newcastle sides proved to be successful and popular and paved the way towards a push for a truly national competition. This was undertaken in 1995 with control of the Premiership passing from the NSWRFL to the Australian Rugby League, who were invited 4 more teams from outside NSW to participate in 1995. The prospect of a truly national rugby league competition, in addition to the introduction of pay television in Australia, attracted the attention of global media organisation, News Corporation, and it followed that professional rugby league was shaken to its very foundations in the mid-1990s with the advent of the Super League War. Initially a conflict over broadcasting rights, it became a dispute as to who controlled the sport and which traditional clubs would survive into the new national era, as News Limited formed their own Super League and admitted some former ARL clubs, poaching players from the original ARL league with high salaries. With 22 teams of highly varying quality playing in 2 competitions that year, crowd attendances and corporate sponsorships were spread very thinly, and many teams found themselves in financial difficulty. The ARL undertook moves to invite the traditional clubs that had moved to the Super League competition back into a reunified competition, following a period of negotiation with News Corporation. On the 23rd of September 1997, the ARL announced that it was forming a new company to conduct the competition in 1998. On the 7th of October, newsman Aki Ranginui announced that he was confident that there would be a single competition in 1998. On the 19th of December, representatives of clubs affiliated with the Australian Rugby League gathered at the Sydney Football Stadium to decide whether to accept News Limited's offer of a settlement, eventually voting in favour by 36 votes to 4. As a result, in the following months the National Rugby League, jointly owned by the ARL and News Limited, was formed. It was announced that the inaugural National Rugby League season of 1998 would have 20 teams competing, 19 remaining Super League and ARL teams plus the Melbourne Storm, who were created by Super League for the 1998 season. Clubs on both sides of the war were shut down. Super League decided to close the Hunter Mariners and the financially ruined Perth Reds, who were $10 million in debt at the end of 1997, while the ARL decided to close down the South Queensland Crushes, who were also in severe financial trouble. Additionally, at the end of 1998, the NRL decided to close down former Super League club, the Adelaide Rams, and former ARL club, the Gold Coast Chargers, despite the Gold Coast franchise being one of the few clubs to make a profit during the Super League War. 1998 to 2002, rationalization. One condition of the peace agreement between the ARL and News Limited was that there would be a 14-team competition in 2000. The 20 clubs that played in 1998 would be assessed on various items such as sponsorship, crowds, on-field success and the like. It was also announced that clubs that merged would receive a large sum of money, as well as a guaranteed position in the 2000 NRL competition. The St George Dragons and the Illawarra Steelers were the first clubs to take up the offer, forming the joint venture St George Illawarra Dragons at the end of the 1998 season. The 1999 NRL Grand Final brought about a new official world record attendance for a game of rugby league. 107,999 spectators saw the Melbourne Storm defeat the newly created St George Illawarra Dragons in the decider at Stadium Australia. Balmain and Western Suburbs formed the joint venture club, the West Tigers, at the end of 1999, while North Sydney and Manly Warringah created the ill-fated Northern Eagles. As part of another image makeover, a number of teams also released new club logos. The most notable of these was the Sydney Roosters, dropping the city section of the name for the 2000 season and beyond. Souths were controversially axed from the competition at the end of 1999 for failing to meet the criteria. This move was highly controversial, and on the 12th of November 2000 about 80,000 marched in protest at the continued exclusion. South Sydney challenged the decision in the federal court, claiming that the NRL agreement was exclusionary, intended to unfairly exclude South Sydney, and breached the Trade Practices Act. Justice Paul Finn ruled that the agreement did not specifically exclude any club and dismissed the Rabbitohs' claims for reinstatement into the national competition. Souths appealed this decision and were readmitted into the competition in 2002. The Auckland Warriors experienced much financial hardship in the early part of the decade, ultimately collapsing before being resurrected as the New Zealand Warriors for the 2001 season. They made the grand final in 2002. In 2001, Australia's largest telecommunications provider Telstra became naming rights sponsor of the NRL, with the competition's name becoming the NRL Telstra Premiership, while in 2002 David Gallop took over the CEO role from David Moffat, and the competition has become more and more popular each season. In 2001, the NRL Grand Final started to be played on Sunday nights, a shift from the traditional Sunday afternoon slot used for over a decade prior. 2003 to 2010, record popularity, expansion and centenary. The 2003 season was widely regarded as the most successful since the beginning of the National Rugby League in 1998. The Penrith Panthers rose from the bottom of the table to win the premiership, while the Broncos returned to Suncorp Stadium mid-year. Season 2004 proved even more successful than 2003, with the North Queensland Cowboys going from 11th position in 2003 to 3rd in 2004, narrowly missing out on a maiden grand final berth. Crowd average records were broken in 2003, 2004 and 2005. In 2005, the NRL reached record levels of popularity for its competition. Total crowds for the competition season almost reached the figures for the last year of the competition conducted by the ARL competition of 1995. Prior to the Super League War, the average attendance record remained until 2010. From 2004 to 2005, there was a 39% increase in sponsorship, a 41% increase in merchandise royalties, and a 12% increase in playing participation. In 2005, Business Review Weekly ranked the NRL 497 in revenue of Australian private companies, with revenue of $66.1 million with 35 employees. In 2004, Canterbury Bankstown put a year of turmoil and disgrace at the aftermath of the alleged rape scandal to hold aloft the NRL trophy and give the Bulldogs the first premiership since 1995. In 2005, a record national audience of 4.1 million tuned in to watch the grand final between the West Tigers and the North Queensland Cowboys. The 2006 NRL Grand Final was won by the Brisbane Broncos over the Melbourne Storm, 15-8. The matchup was a significant milestone in the history of the NRL, as two interstate teams contested the grand final for the first time. In the city of Melbourne, whose team was playing in the second grand final, the game's television ratings were higher than in Sydney where the game was played. Crowds were down on 2005, however were better than any other year prior to that. In its 10th season, the NRL returned to having a club based on the Gold Coast, Queensland, with the inclusion of the Gold Coast Titans. The Titans were the first professional sporting team to occupy the Gold Coast since 1998, when the Gold Coast Chargers were one of the teams removed during the NRL's rationalisation process between the end of the Super League War and the 2000 season. The 2007 season saw the return of Monday Night Football and the inclusion of two Friday night games, both of which turned out to be ratings successes. Another change from the previous seasons was a reduction in the number of byes per team in the season, with an odd number of teams contesting between 2002 and 2006. The draw meant that at least one team would have to have a bye each weekend, with the inclusion of the 16th team for the 2007 season. The National Rugby League had the option of reverting back to the system used between 2000 and 2001, where every team played each round. Bet system was not used however, with teams were given just a single bye during the year, grouped in periods that will assist clubs around representative fixtures. The opening round saw 2 matches at Brisbane Suncorp Stadium, the first featuring reigning champions Brisbane against fellow Queensland side North Queensland, while the second match featured the new club, the Gold Coast, playing St George Illawarra. The weather during the middle of the season was less than ideal, with cyclonic conditions severely affecting many NRL games played in Sydney and Newcastle. The 2007 Finals Series saw the South Sydney Rabbitohs return to finals football for the first time in decades. The season culminated on the 30th of September 2007, with the grand final contested between Manly and Melbourne. Melbourne won the title 34-8, and the grand final achieved the honour of being the most watched television show in Australia in 2007. Throughout 2008, the NRL celebrated 100 years since rugby league was introduced into Australia, with several initiatives to recognise the important milestone, including an extensive marketing campaign called the Centenary of Rugby League. The competition began in March with a special heritage round held in mid-April, coinciding with the first round of competition played in 1908. At a gala event on the 17th of April 2008, the team of the century was announced, being full-back Clive Churchill, wingers Ken Irvin, Brian Bevan, centres Reg Gasnier, Mal Meninga, 5/8 Wally Lewis, half-back Andrew Johns, lock John Raper, second row Norm Provan, Ron Coote, props Arthur Beetson, Duncan Hall, hooker Noel Kelly, reserves Graham Langlands, Dally Messenger, Bob Fulton, Frank Berg, coach Jack Gibson. For the second year in a row, the grand final was played between the Melbourne Storm and the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles. In the NRL's first ever twilight decider, the Sea Eagles took out the premiership game 40-0, setting the record for the highest winning margin in her final match. Furthermore, it was the first time a team had been kept scoreless in her final since 1978. The 2009 season marked the beginning of the second century of rugby league in Australia. The grand final that year was played between the Parramatta Eels and once again Melbourne Storm. Melbourne defeated Parramatta 23-16 to win the premiership, to make it 2 premierships out of the last 4 grand finals for the Storm. In 2010, the inaugural All-Stars match was held on the 13th of February, in conjunction with the Sorry Day Reconciliation anniversary, to promote rugby league's long association and involvement with the Aboriginal community. The first match saw the Indigenous All-Stars beat the NRL All-Stars 16-12. The success of this event has seen it become a recurring fixture on the rugby league calendar, with Queensland awarded the hosting rights for the next 3 years. The 29th State of Origin series was also played, featuring the world's first live free-to-air 3D TV broadcast. Queensland later made further history by winning an unprecedented 5th series in a row, and winning the 2010 series by a scoreline of 3-0, the first Origin whitewash since 1995. In 2010, the NRL set a record total season average attendance of 17,367 per game and a record total season aggregate attendance of 3,490,778. During the 2010 final series, the second qualifying match between the West Tigers and Sydney Roosters became the first McIntyre system final to go into extra time, with the 100-minute epic described in media circles as one of the greatest of the modern era. The 2010 head final was played between the St George Illawarra Dragons and the Sydney Roosters. The Dragons won 32-8. This was the first premiership won by the club in its 11-year existence. 2010 present establishment of the ARLC, after several years of preparation and build-up. On the 14th of December 2010, the Australian Rugby League and News Corporation agreed upon a constitutional framework paving the way for the establishment of a new and independent commission to govern the sport in Australia. The negotiations of such a framework became drawn out over establishing details, primarily of sponsorship, media rights, funding of state bodies, funding of the Melbourne Storm, debate over News Limited, private ownership of clubs, and also of individual appointments to the new body. On 10 February 2012, the independent commission, known as the Australian Rugby League Commission, assumed control of all levels of the game, replacing former state-based boards and assuming full control of the NRL from the NRL partnership teams. The NRL consists of 16 clubs, 8 clubs based within Greater Sydney, 2 in regional New South Wales, 3 in Queensland and 1 each in Victoria, the Australian Capital Territory and New Zealand. The league operates on a single group system, with no divisions or conferences and no relegation and promotion from other leagues. St George Illawarra Dragons and West Tigers have 2 locations indicated due to more than one ground being occupied by both teams. A total of 23 clubs have played in the National Rugby League since its first season in 1998. For a list of all clubs past and present, see List of teams in the NSWRL, ARL, SL, NRL. For a complete list of all teams no longer competing in the NRL, see here. 11 clubs have been members of the National Rugby League for every season since its inception in 1998. This group includes Brisbane, Canberra, Canterbury, Bankstown, Cronulla, Melbourne, New Zealand, Newcastle, North Queensland, Parramatta, Penrith and Roosters. Current clubs * capacity for rugby league games may differ from official stadium capacity. Foundation clubs. 2 of the teams currently in the NRL were founded in 1908, the first year of rugby league competition in Australia. The Sydney Roosters and South Sydney Rabbitohs. Foundation clubs. Western Suburbs Magpies and Balmain Tigers have been competing as a merged entity, the West Tigers, since the 2000 NRL season. Famous NRL rivalries. NRL venues, traditional and non-traditional. Since 1998, NRL clubs have played both trial matches and premiership season games in areas that do not have representation in the NRL in both Australia and New Zealand. Non-traditional venues that have been used include Bluetongue Stadium, Westpac Stadium, Barlow Park, TO Stadium, Nib Stadium, Stadium Mackay and Eden Park in Auckland. Season structure. Pre-season. The NRL pre-season typically begins in February and ends in early March. Clubs generally use this time to organize trial matches to test playing combinations. However, some clubs play for trophies. Easts and Wests play for the Foundation Cup, while South Sydney and St George Illawarra play for the Charity Shield. The trials are typically played in cities and towns that normally don't host NRL matches. In the past, a World Sevens Rugby League football tournament has been hosted. However, this was scrapped due to injury concerns. All-Stars match. Beginning in 2010, the All-Stars match has become a major fixture in the NRL preseason. The teams are chosen via public voting and the 2 sides play for the Arthur Beetson Trophy. Auckland Nines in 2014. The inaugural inaugural Rugby League Nines tournament took place, featuring all 16 NRL clubs. It is staged at Eden Park, Auckland, New Zealand. This two-day tournament has now become a regular fixture, taking place at the end of January each year. Women's Nines games are also fixtured alongside the main tournament between the Australian and New Zealand women's teams. World Club Series. The World Club Series is an annual tournament played between the champion clubs of the National Rugby League and the European Super League competitions and 4 invited teams. Until season 2014, it was known as the World Club Challenge, being only a single match between the champions. However, in 2015 it was expanded to include 4 invited teams who played 2 exhibition games before the final. The first match of its kind was played in 1976, and it was then played sporadically throughout the late 80s and 90s, including a one-off Super League tournament in 1997, before becoming a regular annual pre-season fixture since 2000. To date, only English and Australian sides have competed in the World Club Challenge Premiership season. As rugby league is a winter sport in Australasia, the NRL Premiership season usually begins in early March, following a brief series of trial matches. During each pre-season trial match series, the Charity Shield is played for between the Rabbitohs and Dragons. A round of regular season Premiership games is then played every weekend for 26 weeks, usually until the end of September. In most rounds, 2 matches are played on Friday night, 3 on Saturday night, 2 on Sunday afternoon, and 1 on Monday night. Special themed weeks include Heritage Round, Women in League Round, and Rivalry Round. Separate trophies between rival teams are also presented throughout the season, such as the Ron Coote Cup between the Roosters and Rabbitohs, Jack Gibson Cup between Parramatta and the Roosters, the 1989 League Legends Cup between the Tigers and Raiders, the Bandage Bear Cup between the Bulldogs and Eels, and the Mal Riley Cup between Newcastle and Manly Warringah. Teams receive 2 competition points for a win, and 1 point for a draw. The bye also receives 2 points, a loss no points. Teams on the ladder are ranked by competition points. Then match points differential and points percentage are used to separate teams with equal competition points. At the end of the regular season, the club which is ranked highest on the ladder is declared minor premiers. Representative season. As well as playing for the club in the Premiership, NRL players are regularly selected to play in a number of representative competitions that are conducted throughout each season. The representative season is generally considered to be a period of rugby league that runs from about the middle of April until the middle of July. Each year, the fixtures take into account the following games: the annual Anzac Test between Australia and New Zealand, the New South Wales City vs Country Origin match, the 3-match State of Origin series. Other representative matches that can occur later in the year are the Prime Minister's 13 match in Papua New Guinea, the 4 Nations tournament, Australia, New Zealand and England, plus another qualifier, the Quadrennial World Cup tournament. Finals series. The 8 highest-placed teams at the end of the regular season compete in the finals series. The system consists of a number of games between the top 8 teams over 4 weeks in September, until only 2 teams remain. These 2 teams then contest the grand final, which is usually played on the first Sunday of October. From 1998 to 2011, the NRL used the McIntyre Final 8 system, but with the introduction of the ARLC, it was decided to change to the current format, which was perceived as fairer for teams finishing in the top 4. Grand Final. The NRL Grand Final, which determines the season's premiers, is one of Australia's major sporting events and is one of the largest attended club championship events in the world. Since 1999 it has been contested at Sydney's Stadium Australia, which was the primary athletics venue for the 2000 Olympic Games. The first year it was held at Stadium Australia, the NRL Grand Final broke the record for attendance at an Australian Rugby League game, with 107,999 people attending. The Grand Final had traditionally been played on Sunday afternoons, shifting to 8 p.m. in 2001, then to 7 p.m. thereafter. However, from 2008, a compromise was reached between official broadcaster Nine Network's preferred starting time and the afternoon starting time of 3 p.m., with the Grand Final beginning at 5 p.m. AEST. Each year the Grand Final breakfast, a function that is attended by both teams, hundreds of guests and screened live on Australian television, is held during the week before the game. The game itself is usually preceded by an opening ceremony featuring entertainment and the singing of the national anthem by well-known Australasian and international musical acts. After the pre-game entertainment, it is traditional for the NRL trophy to be delivered to the field by an Australian Army helicopter shortly before kick-off. At the conclusion of the Grand Final, there is a presentation ceremony where the winning team are awarded premiership rings. The player judged to be the man of the match by the Australian national team selectors is awarded the prestigious Clive Churchill Medal, and the Prime Minister of Australia is typically on hand to hand the trophy to the winning captain. In 2010, the Government of New South Wales secured the Grand Final for Stadium Australia until 2022 for $45 million. Premiership winners. Note: Melbourne Storm were stripped of the 2007-2009 Premiership titles and the 2006, 2007, 2008 minor Premiership titles due to the breach of the salary cap. The titles were withheld by the NRL rather than awarding them to the runners-up. Winners. These are NRL results only and therefore only show the list of premiers as of 1998. Melbourne were stripped of its minor premierships from 2006 to 2008, and its premierships from 2007 and 2009 due to gross salary cap breaches.